So welcome to another episode of the Ukraine History Podcast, and I'm here with Suzanne Kelly. And Suzanne, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and what you specialize in.
Thank you, Sam. I am the CEO and publisher of the Cipher Brief. It is a national security focused media organization. I was the intelligence correspondent for CNN for a number of years and a career journalist before that with not only CNN but other outlets around the world. Really just decided that national security was so important of an issue for all of us to clearly understand that the experts and the sources of who you listen to on these topics really mattered. We live in an age of not only 24/7 television, but where most of us are getting our news and information from our phones and our devices. It really mattered to me that the people who we were talking to about what these issues mean were true experts, and they don't have to agree with each other. It's better sometimes if they don't, actually, because you get a diversity of a range of views on these issues that are impacting our current national security and our future security. Like in the cases of Ukraine is a great example. But that's basically what I've been doing for the last 8 years, and have a fantastic team that we work with to bring news, open source reports, podcasts, opinions, and events that are all focused on national and global security.
Yeah, and you're one of these new generation of media companies that sprung up in the podcasting era, where I don't think there's any even big news organization out there that has the reputation for being able to go inside the intelligence community like you. Pretty bold move, stepping out of probably a well-paying media job to start your own venture. How has that journey been?
It's one of many crazy moves I've made in my life. I'd say a pattern of doing things that were somewhat unexpected and out of the ordinary. But yeah, I think doing this, I've had former acting directors and deputy directors of the CIA say before that they've never in their lives would have imagined that so many spies would kind of come out of the cold and talk to media. And a lot of them, the first stop is the Cipher Brief, simply because it's also something of a trusted entity. And by trusted, I don't mean that you take a side. By trusted, it means that, there was for a long time a fear that if a public person goes out and does an interview with the media, that the media is going to take just that one salacious comment they want and throw the rest away and build a story around it. And that's unfortunately what media, a lot of media has evolved into these days. And I just thought it was a real crime to leave out the context.
Yeah.
So we just became a trusted entity. We give people a say. We give them the time they need to make their full case. We question them. We make sure that, things make sense. We ask probing questions. We do all of those things. But I think being trusted in media in this day and age is huge. And I think just from the perspective of the interviewee, knowing that what you say is not going to be chopped up and dissected and then put out through somebody else's lens later is a really big deal.
Yeah. Well, just a little bit of context. We did our interview for episode 1 with General David Petraeus, and I think you're the next episode after that in this podcast. So, and I'm giving you that spot, position of honor, following the great late CIA, well, not the late, but the great CIA director, retired now, General Petraeus.
Yes.
Because you helped me and my foundation, work with him. He's coming to our golf tournament in January, which we talk about on this podcast, to raise money for our foundation.
Yeah.
How did you get to know General Petraeus so well? And he's even on your board. Tell me about, so you have so many great relationships. That the conference you have coming up, you have the director coming.
I think we're very fortunate. We've got the current director of the CIA speaking at the conference that we hold in October every year. We have been extremely fortunate to have relationships with a number of former directors of the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency. We work with folks from the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, the White House. I think, again, it just all goes back to trust. I think, when I created this, Sam, I when you're a reporter, you work with sources every day. And you have to develop their trust, almost like an intelligence officer. It's funny how many times I've heard these are parallel careers. You just report to different people. Yeah. Some things you keep secrets, other things you want everyone to know.
A journalist will go to jail rather than disclose their sources.
That's right. Yeah. That happens a lot. But, it was really important to me to go out to people first and just kind of float this idea. And I went to former CIA Director George Tenet. I went to Stan McChrystal. I went to David Petraeus. I went to the person he used to work for, General Jack Keane. I went to General Michael Hayden. And I just said, hey, I feel like there's a need for getting better information, getting information that does provide all the context and bringing a diversity of thought. So let's go talk to an intelligence officer about what this means. Let's talk to someone from the military about what this means. Let's talk to a policymaker about what this means. And let's try to see if we can make a big picture here that everyone can understand the impact of these events. So I just went out and started talking to people and developing that trust. And I was very fortunate. I think almost every single person I've invited to come and be a Cipher Brief expert has said yes. We have, just a great track record of trying to bring different perspectives to light that I feel like our success is only an indicator that there's a need out there for this. Mm-hmm. So Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries was outside the door. That's because during this visit, to Kyiv, Sam, it was really important to us to talk to as many people from Ukraine, people on the street from Ukraine, but also at the government level, to get a sense of what is needed here and how to make those connections that are really going to help, shore up support for this war. And one of the things the Cipher Brief did, I mentioned off the top that we do events, and one of the things that we did after reporting here in February is we came back at the end of May, and we had about 3 or 4 weeks, I think, to organize a conference where we brought 50 U.S. Business professionals to Kyiv
during one of the most intense period of rocket attack, the most intense period of rocket attacks during the war.
It was. I was actually very surprised that so many people came, and I'm glad they did, though, because and every single one of them said they were glad they did. Yeah. Because number one, even though the rocket attacks are horrific in Kyiv, they are intimidation tactics. Yeah. A lot of the rockets are being exploded before. I mean, it's such an amazing defense of this city from missile attacks. And everyone here made connections that they feel like bring their expertise and Ukrainian expertise together. Yeah. And so one of the guests that we had was the Minister of Strategic Industries, and we wanted to talk to him about how he's thinking about using Ukraine as a testing field, particularly for the things that they need most urgently on the battlefield right now in military equipment. Yeah, and we're actually on your set in your hotel room at the famous Intercontinental Hotel. One of these days, I'm gonna probably try and later in my life make a movie about this hotel and all the things I've seen here. Can you imagine if the walls could talk? Yeah, like Hotel Budapest. It's going to be like one of those movies just focused on a property. Yeah. And look, what's amazing about what you were able to pull together, that's when I met you. You pulled off this amazing conference. I couldn't believe you got all those people to come into Ukraine. Yeah. They all got on the train, even when the missiles were flying. But it wasn't me, right? It speaks to the appetite. Yeah. Of the American entrepreneurs and the people who have these great ideas and great experience and great success. It speaks to how badly they want to put that into action for good. Yeah. And that's patriotic businessmen. It's absolutely right. Yeah. It was really fascinating couple of days. This is the wild, wild East. It's like it is. It's like the American West. That's right. It's drawn all these adventurous Americans out to the East. It's crazy. I mean, how often have you heard ministers from countries say, sure, use our land as a testing ground for your new systems, your new, weapons, your new, and not only that, but let's bring the Ukrainian sort of ingenuity to the table and let's make them better. Let's see what we can add or layer on top to make these products even better. And we've always known that Ukraine has been an absolute hotbed for innovation and talent. We thought it was always just in the IT and tech sectors and, they're so smart in those areas, but it actually turns out they're smart in a whole bunch of areas that, we're now seeing put into practice, which I think is really cool. Yeah. And that's what I love about your business is that you don't just give out information, but you provide really valuable services, bringing companies over here that want to do business, but you help them figure out the security and intelligence situation. So it's, we really all we really do is bring people together around a common focus, which is national and global security. That's all we do. Yeah. I don't want to take more credit than we deserve, but we just happen to know a lot of really cool people. Yeah, you and I, that's our business model. We both. That's right. That's what we do. So let's go back to the intelligence, and I want to segue into. I have the privilege of interviewing you, someone who's watched intelligence and reported on the intelligence community, national security for a long time, knows all the top people in that world. And there's this old saying that there's
policy successes and intelligence failures, and everything always gets blamed on the intelligence community. And take us back to 2022. We just pulled out of Afghanistan, and the whole national security establishment, you're covering it. Horrible situation, like really low point, I think, in American foreign policy since Vietnam. And then you start to see the intelligence coming out about Ukraine. We were out of Afghanistan in August. There's all kinds of hand-wringing. What are your recollections from that time period? And when did this story about Ukraine start to pop up on your radar? And what were you thinking at that time?
We're always monitoring because we put out this fantastic open source report where we just kind of tap into all the open source reporting around the world about what's happening. And we were seeing consistently this buildup of Russian troops along the border. And all these analysts had hats on and they would say, well, we're seeing this, but we're not seeing that. And that's a missing ingredient before we can definitely determine an invasion. And we just, repeatedly for weeks and weeks and weeks, and the numbers weren't getting smaller, they were getting bigger. And then we saw the Biden administration, I think, do something that was brilliant and that should be done more often, which was declassify intelligence and then share it with the world. I think that was the first time that I can remember the government using intelligence in that way, declassifying and sharing to try to show the world what they were seeing. Mm-hmm. It's always been, the intelligence community has always been full of secrets because they have to protect sources and methods. And if they lose that opportunity, then the intelligence, can be penetrated and is useless. Mm-hmm. So it's important that they do what they do and the way they do it. But by declassifying and sharing this, I think it was one of the first times I've ever seen through the eyes of the government and the intelligence community what they were seeing.
Wow.
It proved really effective.
Mm-hmm.
It got a lot of attention. And I think it's something that, we're looking forward to welcoming the principal deputy director of national intelligence down to our own conference that we hold every year on national security in Georgia, in the United States, Georgia, not the one over here. And we're looking forward to talking to her and welcoming her to talk a little bit more about how the DNI sees and the ODNI sees the declassification of intelligence in the Biden administration, because ultimately it's a policy decision. Mm-hmm. The president has to decide. The president decides what's classified and what's not.
Yeah.
But using that to kind of show the world what Russia was doing along the border, I think was really important.
I was here living in Ukraine. I had 65 people in 2 different companies that were working for me. I literally, it was both scary to see it, alarming, but also I think it saved a lot of lives. We took appropriate measures. A lot of Ukrainians, although they didn't want to believe it, in the back of their minds, they were getting ready. But it ultimately had this effect that I think it stole all of the oxygen from Russian misinformation to the point where it was almost like a bit of a theater of the absurd, watching them try to create a justification and pretext for the war. When did you think, and I know you have all your old newsletters, when did it become clear to you that the U.S. intelligence community really believed that this was happening, and when did you start getting really concerned about it?
I think when they declassified and shared that intelligence, it was really clear. They were showing images like along the border when we were starting to see the equipment that was being moved in, and we were starting to hear from people who knew better than we do as, receivers of news, what that meant, what that had meant historically when one country is invading another, like why it was significant. When we started to answer all of those questions for the American public and frankly for the world, by not only showing them the evidence and then telling them what our assessment was of what it meant, I think there was a level of trust there where traditionally you haven't had a lot of trust in, CIA. Some people go running and they're like, oh no, they keep secrets, and they keep secrets for good reasons. Mm-hmm. But I think them sharing, and the DNI's office, of course, but them sharing that information was huge, and explaining what it meant and why they thought that. Because you can tell me today, Sam, the sky is purple, and I'll say, well, okay, I know the sky is purple, but I'm going to ask you, why do you think the sky is purple? And maybe you'll have a way of explaining to me why, from your perspective, you believe that. I feel like we need more of that kind of dialogue to build more trust. But I think that's the greatest decision they ever made. And it really was a clear sign to me that they're willing to try new things to convince people that Russian disinformation is, in fact, disinformation. Mm-hmm. And they were willing to show people why they believed that was so. And I thought it was a real turning point. It was unprecedented as far as I know.
What was the mood like in the intelligence community among professionals? It's really, you couldn't have been happy that they were right. And I remember telling my own members of my company, we're going to evacuate. I hope I'm wrong. I fear that, unfortunately, this is going to happen, because I believe the intelligence. And in a way, I was personally horrified that they were right, but I was also really proud. I don't know if I've ever said this in my life, and it sounds kind of strange. I was really proud of my intelligence, my government, and the way they handled that. What was the mood like in the intelligence community over, I think, this really historic impact they had on potentially saving a country?
I can't really speak to the mood of the entire intelligence community, but I can tell you the people who I know who work in the intelligence community who I did talk to, I think also were incredibly proud. There's a lot of still hand-wringing over things in the past that maybe weren't identified in time, really big things. I think that, it would be horrible to be an intelligence officer some days, because you work so hard. You pull together information, and it's just that one time that you miss something, or you don't connect dots on something that you're known for, because you can't talk about your successes. Mm-hmm. And so when the public only knows you for the things you got wrong, and they have no idea the mountain of things in the background that you've got right, they tend not to maybe see you in the way they should. They don't have the context, right? So I've said that word like 25,000 times, but
it's true.
But they don't have the context. And so I think when that happened, there were a lot of people who I talked to who were very glad to see it happen and would like to see it happen more.
So the war started. The intelligence community, I think, played a critical role because Ukrainians were in denial. President Zelensky, the Ukrainian army rolled out of their barracks the day before. And they displaced their Air Force, thankfully, 2-3 days before. I remember watching the intelligence, and I was really concerned when I saw that blood was being shipped to the front lines, these very specific things indicating why they believed it was happening. But that was I think, part of the reason Ukraine was able to withstand. They knew that Gostomel airfield, if that would have been seized, they were going to lose their capital. They knew that was Russia's plan, because we warned them about that. They fought back and made sure that didn't happen. It was a key turning point of the war. So the war starts. How does that change your business, your focus, your reporting? And then tell us a little bit about your adventures. You've come into Ukraine and met, I think, some amazing characters on the pages of the history books here.
We have. We are very fortunate to work with incredibly talented and experienced people in our role at the Cipher Brief. And we've been in a few times now. We came the first time in February. A fantastic friend.
February 2023, right?
February 2023 this year, yeah. Right on the cusp of the one-year anniversary of the invasion. There was already talk then about Ukraine's counteroffensive, what it was going to look like, when it was going to be launched. We didn't see it launched until later in the beginning of June. But a lot of just focus on, wow, 1 year is a milestone, right? Yeah. So what have we accomplished in 1 year, and what are we going to be able to accomplish in the next year?
So before you came back, that year between the start of the full-scale invasion, because Ukraine's been at war since 2014, and then the anniversary when you first came, what was that year like? How did that change your business in terms of the focus of your podcasts? How did you start to focus on Ukraine and become interested in it to the point that you took that trip?
So because we're a media organization that focuses on national and global security, we were already interested in what it meant. I think once we saw the invasion happen, though, it was like, media is funny. Like, they follow the shiny object, right? And sometimes they miss the really, really big things in the background. But I think once that started, it became clear to everybody who was thinking about what this war meant that it was a massive strategic move. We started seeing alliances form that were very concerning. We're still seeing that. Mm-hmm. China refused to condemn Russia for launching the invasion. Their partnership is very complicated and very concerning to the West. We started to see Iran delivering drones and drone systems and taking part. And now we're seeing North Korea. So you started to see over that year the shaping of new alliances. You saw on the positive side, the United States and NATO, which had for years under the Trump administration not enjoyed a great relationship. All of a sudden, there's nothing to bring your focus about sharper than war. And having a common enemy. And I think that's exactly what happened. So our interest obviously grew. We were very interested in understanding the strategic importance of this war. I am always interested in understanding how partnerships impact the outcome of wars. I don't think that any of us does anything alone, whether it's running a media organization or fighting a war. And I think the people you keep around you are critical to your success.
What about the intelligence sharing between the United States and its allies with Ukraine? I mean, you saw all kinds of unprecedented things. I think Ukrainians would be the first ones to tell you, if it was not for American intelligence that is being shared really at unprecedented levels, especially outside of NATO even, that Ukraine wouldn't have made it through the war.
I think it's, I've had the great fortune, me and my colleagues have met with the head of military intelligence here, who's somewhat legendary, Budanov, twice now. And we've met with the head of intelligence here twice now. And in every, those were, in one case, an interview, in other cases, private meetings to kind of understand what's happening. In every case, they have described the intelligence relationship they have with the United States and with NATO, with the West, as excellent. They feel like, they told me they feel like they're getting what they need. They have the support they need on the intelligence side. So I think that's been a very positive alliance there.
What about the role of commercial intelligence providers? What have you seen in that? How has that industry grown as a result of the Ukraine war, and what role has that played?
I think it's fascinating. I think a lot of the future of intelligence really lies in the private sector, if you ask my personal opinion. Absolutely. I think there are companies out there that are doing amazing work in the tools they're using to gather intelligence. They're hiring brilliant analysts to tell us what it means. And I think what we saw, Sam, you'll remember in those very early days, is a lot of U.S. companies that do private intelligence coming in and offering their services for free. A lot of those companies are sponsors of our conference, but there are others. I mean, there were many, many companies who were coming in and offering. I know quite a few of them. And I think them coming in and saying, we want to give you what we have because it's, we're not going to charge you anything for this because we share the same values. We want to be on the side of right. It was extraordinary. And I also think that that's shaping the future of how all countries will go to war in the future. It's never going to be a country against country war again. It's always going to have a much, much stronger partnership with the private sector. And the private sector goes all the way back to Revolutionary War or maybe before that.
It's always been there. But
it's always been there. But the strength and the ability that the private sector companies now have, the capabilities they have, I think are the game changer.
Yeah, I mean, look at Starlink in terms of that has been absolute game changer. Pretty controversial in some respects with the power that Elon Musk has over the direction of the war, with some of his fears and insecurities around his personal safety and his relationship with Russia. And
it's been an interesting story.
Yeah, and a lot more details coming out in the book from Walter Isaacson about that.
Yeah.
So let's move on to your impressions from your trips to Ukraine. You met some really colorful characters. Budanov is absolutely one of those figures that only history could produce. I always say that history is way better than fiction.
Oh, yes.
This guy is pretty amazing. I mean, tell me your impressions of your meetings with him.
I wrote a story when we first met him in February, and not for a shameless plug, but if you're interested in reading it, just Google the Cipher Brief and Budanov, Budanov. But I think, that story captured really well kind of our impressions of him, because it described not only how serious and focused he is. I mean, he has one mission, and that is to kill Russians.
Yeah.
And he is okay to say it that way. He doesn't care about, how that plays in the press. He does not care. He's proud of it. He has a mission. He's extremely focused. He's also a really just colorful character. I mean, we met the first time in his office, which is now his home.
Yeah.
Which, we walked in and there's this dimly lit outer office with someone sitting at a reception desk, and Shrek is playing. The movie Shrek is playing in the dark, and I felt like I was walking into a James Bond movie. And there are two frogs. Yes. There are two frogs kept in an aquarium. There's a bird in the corner. And I mean,
his wife lives in the office too.
His wife lives there. I said, "Where do you live?" He's like, "Here." I said, "Where does your wife live?" He said, "Here." I said, "Well, that's love. That is definitely love." No, but he really is just, he seems almost bigger than life. But I have to tell you truthfully, there are a number of people that I have met in Ukraine that seem bigger than life. I mean, it's just, And I think the core thing about what is it that makes him strange, it's not the frogs in the aquarium in the corner, and it's not the bird or whatever it is, the collection of bullets and the things that he keeps in his office, but it's that core sense of, I know who I am, I know what my mission is, and it is completely tied to the future of Ukraine. So it's completely tied to this sense of nationalism and pride and wanting to protect your country. And it's very difficult, Sam, to come here and to not walk away feeling how strong that is.
Yeah. And, you know, he's I've heard stories that they had to pull him off of helicopters. He was trying to get on the mission to Snake Island, which he ordered.
Yes.
He was coming back from missions briefing on teleconference. And
I met him a couple of days ago, and I'll be honest, that was the second time that we had met. He looked like he maybe possibly hadn't slept in a couple of days. And, I have a feeling that's par for the course for him.
Yeah. Absolutely legendary figure. And then another character's the head of cybersecurity for SBU, Ilya. Talk about your interactions with him. And
Ilya is amazing too. I mean, the guy's like a former boxing champion, or I can't remember what it. He'd be upset and disappointed in me for forgetting. But
knows how to fight.
He knows how to fight, but he knows how to fight not only person to person, but in cyber.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time we sat down with him at the SBU office in Kyiv, he was just so knowledgeable about every single thing the Russians had tried to do, and not just in this war, but since Crimea, since 2014. They've been keeping, a log of like the advancements, like who these groups are, the tools they're trying to deploy, how they're trying to get around what Ukraine's trying to do. And he's always thinking one step ahead of the enemy. And I think they had a lot of success very early on because they were always thinking one step ahead. And he's another one who just really, really not only appreciates but understands the value of the private sector and what they're able to bring to this fight. And he is one who has partnered with a lot of private sector companies as well and taken all of the goodwill and all of the capabilities to put them, to use in this war.
Yeah, and for those listening in America, the SBU is probably kind of like our FBI, but they're probably a lot more powerful. It's an inheritor.
Kind of FBI, CIA,
But they do counterintelligence inside the country.
Yeah.
Focused on finding saboteurs, people inside, Russian agents inside Ukraine, Ukrainians who've defected towards Russia in occupied territories and inside Ukraine-controlled territories. And it's really powerful organization. It has a KGB legacy. They used to be heavily infiltrated by the Russians, and they've been cleaning that up. But Ilya, and actually he was on your podcast, and I would highly recommend going to listen to that episode at Cypher Brief. And I was just really impressed. You brought him to your conference, and I was struck by how well-spoken he was and how articulate he was. And really, even the United States and the top Western intelligence agencies, if they aren't already, they will be taking lessons from Ukraine and integrating it back into their system.
100%, yes. 100%. There's so much to learn here. Yeah. And that's been the message, and a lot of the people I've talked to here is this is not giving Ukraine charity.
Yeah.
Right. If you understand what it means to invest in the success and the future of a country, they have so much to give back. And I feel like that's the message that the American people sometimes aren't receiving in the normal kind of media stories. You hear about the war, what happened on the front, what's happening with the government, who Zelensky welcomed today. But you're not hearing about how the innovation and the passion and quite frankly, just the intellect of Ukrainian people are improving on all of these things. And that's giving back to the world. So I see this more as an investment than I do as, charitable giving to support a war.
Yeah. And then the SSO commander, we also met, and it was funny, that was your first meeting in Kiev, and General Petraeus was there. And
that's right.
There's a huge missile strike going on, and General Petraeus says, "I'm okay," and General Franco said, "I'm okay if you're okay," and General Petraeus said, "Yeah, this is fine."
Yeah,
no one left the room.
Whole American delegation, right? But you've got a four-star General Petraeus, so we're not going to expect him to flinch anyway. But whole team. I think there was maybe one person in the room when the air raid sirens went off and said, "Are we going to do this or are we going to stay?" And we all stayed. And I think General Petraeus just said, "Well, just one thing. You might want to close the curtain."
And I think they didn't. They didn't.
I don't think they did either. Yeah, and it continued on. But you know what? It's a very small picture of how Ukrainians are living every single day, right? So it feels like it's a big idea because it's a U.S. delegation, but this is how the people here have to live every single day.
Yeah.
And those air sirens, when we were here in May, were going off, 12 times a day, it seemed like.
Yeah.
So businesses stop. You've got to close your business. You've got to take, you're supposed to go to the bunkers. I think now Ukrainians don't even bother to do that because they know how successful, but this is how they're living every day. And I think that was what I took away from that experience. It wasn't as much the Americans being tough as it was, wow, this is what you guys have to go through. Yeah. I can't imagine that happening in New York.
Yeah.
Can you?
No, it was crazy. And look, General Horenko, he used to work with Bogdanov and Gore, and we got a picture of him with your delegation. He's like this giant.
He is, yeah. Absolutely. Another larger than life character.
Straight out of central casting for special operations. I
feel like this whole war is straight out of central casting.
Yeah, these characters are, it's interesting. I always say that I look back on World War I, and it's very hard to find any memorable personalities, but World War II, you have these amazingly vivid characters, and the same thing in Ukraine, like Zelensky, Bogdanov, Horenko, Zaluzny, all these guys, true legends in the history books already, and that's what this podcast focuses on. Well, Suzanne, it's been amazing to hear your personal insights on the intelligence community. I think we all have a lot to be proud of in America and Great Britain, and those two especially. Other ones in the West, a little bit different in terms of leading up to the war, but I think it just goes to show the power of intelligence. We usually never hear about our successes, and here we do. I think it's going to change the paradigm of how we handle intelligence in the future.
I think you're right.
Probably for the good, more transparency, more proactive, using intelligence as information, operations, weapons, and war. And it was fascinating to hear your insights on these legendary characters for the history books.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you so much, and thanks for what you're doing, Sam. It's been a pleasure to get to know you this year, and to have the opportunity to work with you in a number of ways. I just very much appreciate how dedicated you are to connecting people as well, because I think that's what makes all the difference, not only in this war, but overall.
Also, you have your conference, which you do annually, the next one coming up when is it?
We have one that we do in the United States in October. We'll be doing another one in Kyiv in the spring.
Yeah, and that would be, for anyone listening to this who wants to do business in Ukraine, you organized a great conference last time in no time, and now you're going to have time to plan.
Yes, imagine what that will be like.
We'll be helping you here on the ground. So that's going to be great. So if you're listening to this and you'd like to reach out to you, how do they find you to reach out about that and just hear your...
So the saviour.com is a great way. We have different emails there for different ways that people would like to reach out and connect. And that's where you can find that open source report that we do twice a day as well. You can see a lot of the insights from people like General Petraeus, and a lot of the people we meet here, we then write about and publish what that was like. So that's all at the saviour.com, and we're very grateful. We're a media organization that is focused on trying to do good by bringing as many different perspectives to the table that are deeply experienced perspectives. So we always appreciate every new reader.
All right. So Suzanne, thank you for being the second and
I feel so honored
guest of honor on our podcast for helping us launch this whole effort. We are forever in your debt for the help you provided to Borderlands Foundation. That's why we're trying to get you out right after General Petraeus and the next long list of guests we're going to have on here. And look forward to supporting you and Cipher Brief in your work here in Ukraine, and helping you guys do your work here.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's an honor to work with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne.